This is the Content Strategy Insights podcast, episode number 185. Content operations work best when they can scale, when they can take full advantage of the best design and content practices. Traditional content workflows that rely on hand-built pages conflate design and content concerns. Teasing out these concerns and helping organizations build efficient, scalable systems is Tuija Riekkinen's forte. Her work on both design systems and content systems gives her a unique perspective on these important elements of enterprise content architectures.
Welcome to the Content Strategy Insights podcast, where accomplished content strategy experts share their wisdom with our friends in the content community. Our mission is to democratize content strategy, to make its principles and practices accessible to everyone. And now, here's your host, Larry Swanson.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode number 185 of the Content Strategy Insights podcast. I am really delighted today to welcome to the show Tuija Riekkinen. I hope I got that right. It's a Finnish name, and I'm just a dumb American doing my best. But welcome. Tuija she's a consultant. She's currently working in a capacity as a digital project management professional at IKEA, where she's working on, well, we'll talk about this. That's what the conversation's about. She's all about scale and getting out of your bubbles and omnichannel content. And anyhow, welcome to you. Tell the folks a little bit more about your work there.
Well, thank you, Larry, and thanks for having me. It's a great opportunity for me to be in your podcast. So I am a digital product leader, and I did work for in that capacity for a digital design system for 3 years, and now I've shifted into more content management related product. So what I'm doing is that I'm actually working quite closely with my team. So managing the roadmap, managing the priorities, and bringing the team on board in what we are aiming for, and also working with the stakeholders to really understand their view on things and assessing the maturity of how they see content management, and then adapt our communication to that.
Nice. And, a lot of my listeners I know are content designers working in like the digital product world, and all those roles and things you just described are their world, like working with product managers and then there's also a lot of collaboration with designers and engineers and researchers and other folks as well. One of the things we've talked a fair amount about your work, and one of the things that I really appreciate, or the thing I most appreciate, I think, about the way you talk about things, is your sort of holistic approach and how you are aware of and knowledgeable of those individual crafts, but are really good about pulling them together. Can you talk a little bit about your sort of philosophy and approach to your work?
Yeah, sure. So I think I kind of realized that I have been always like a little odd person in different digital initiatives, because I'm not a designer, I'm not a developer, I'm not a project manager, I'm not an architect. I've always kind of wondered that what am I? And that sort of always forced me to be very curious about how the different professionals in this area kind of approach the topic. And I've sort of learned quite a lot. So I've always been the person in between different people or types of people or types of disciplines or professionals. So in the past, I was between the business and the IT. And now I feel that I'm like in between design and developers, or between leadership and the product professionals like developers and designers. And I suppose that has been kind of the reason why I've always been then like supporting, or not looking at things that there is this one group of professionals who can make the difference, because that's not the case. I mean, you have very talented designers, you have very talented developers, architects, engineers, leaders, but all of them need to come together in order to actually take something from start to completion, as we say in the Agile. So now when I kind of say that I have been the person in between, now I would like to see that my role is rather to bring them together and facilitate the discussions in a way that people understand each other. Because, I mean, I've noticed recently that it actually requires quite a lot from me. I need to really put myself out there and to really like ask the stupid questions in order to encourage people to really explain what they mean and really like ask multiple times so that we actually then get onto the same page, because it's not very comfortable role sometimes, but I guess I'm experienced and old enough not to care. But yeah, I guess that's the thing, that it is really like supporting people to understand each other and yeah, kind of force people outside of their little bubble, I guess, because it is all about like delivering the value, and the value, you can't, one person in a team can't really deliver the value. You need a bunch of different professionals to do it. And I don't know, I mean, I've always worked in digital, so I don't know how is it outside of digital, that is it like that you know, you do need a cross-functional team to actually deliver something.
That's interesting.
And
You got me thinking now about the history of project or product and project management. Like, was it different before digital? Like, was it all, maybe that's where waterfall comes from, because you just had like physical dependencies or something that had to happen before the next thing could ensue. But I guess that might be a whole other conversation we could have sometime. But I'm really curious about the sort of the other thing I really appreciate about you is your pragmatic approach to this. That you're like, okay, here's the situation. We have all these really talented and focused and disciplined crafts all working towards their thing, and they all have each other to rely on. Here I am out by myself trying to make like a customer. And a third thing I love about you is your customer centricity, you know. And so you're like, how do we best serve these customers? Got all these talented people, have some resources. What's your approach for putting, like, I guess the first thing is like, how do you help span the communication things? Because everybody's using slightly different language or things like that. How do you get people aligned on language to start, I guess?
that's a very good question. I mean, in digital, we have lots of words that people understand in a different way. So basically, you can have a bunch of people in the same meeting talking about one thing, and you know, people clearly understand certain words in a different way. So I don't know. I've always been pretty good in sensing when there is a situation that people are interpreting some word in a different way. I don't know where that comes from, but I guess I'm also quite good in, I don't know, just interrupting the discussions and say that, hey, hold on, should we kind of go, you know, couple step back and just double check that we actually understand these terms in the same way. So it's again like super pragmatic approach. Having workshops, like it's something that I don't feel that I'm doing enough, but I just today had a workshop with my team where I just gave them a couple of assignments, and we just used 45 minutes after daily to brainstorm on, like, you know, key features that we would need to have in place if there would be a new team who wanted to work with us in a month. And yeah, so we actually didn't get to the point where we started sharing and aligning. But I think that is one way of that. You just first let the team to speak their own language and think from their own point of view. And then you just facilitate some sort of an alignment session. And in that alignment session, you just need to, you know, repeat a couple of times that, okay, well, are we now all talking about, you know, this particular thing, or when we are talking about this word or this term, are we now understanding it in the same way? I mean, you can never achieve like 100% alignment in terms of understanding words, because yeah, like I said, digital is really, really bad in that sense that we have so many words that people understand differently. Like, I don't know, concept is one one of the worst, I guess. You can
or product or customer.
Oh,
There's everybody has their own. Yeah. Hey, as you're talking about that, you're reminding me, one of the many reasons I wanted to talk to you is that you're recently wrapped that 3-year stint working on the design system at IKEA, and now you're moving into the CMS. That's a really fascinating confluence to me. And everything you just said about all these different stakeholders, it seems like it's like there's even more of that to you, like going from mostly designers and design system stuff into content management stuff. Can you talk, maybe a little bit about, are there similarities between working on design systems and content management systems? I guess that would be the first question, how are they alike? Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. And I think that when I was first approached and asked that if I could take the product owner role for design system, I was first a bit like, how will that work out? But then it turned out that there are a lot of similarities. So I think that it's finding the balance between being very generic and being very specific, because now I'm not in content management. I'm now more referring to content modeling. That of course, like you can create super scalable content model, but then of course the content model in that case will be fairly abstract and generic. It works, it scales, but it might be a little bit difficult to use for the editors because it's not specifically created for them. It might lack some the language or terminology in the labels and etc. In the content fields, but it will definitely scale. You can create a content model and 90% of the content teams can get their job done with that content model. Whether that's a good user experience, that's another thing. The same goes for the design system. So when I took over the design system, it was very specific to a one use case and one channel. And then my assignment was to kind of extend it to cover all the digital product, both the customer facing and the coworker facing. So then obviously, no matter how big team you have, you can never scale a digital product by just hiring loads of people, because then you kind of get into the situation that when you have too big of a team, then it just doesn't work well anymore. You have to do some arrangements in that department. But you can't, basically, in digital, you can't scale by hiring loads of people. You can scale it to a certain extent. So then, obviously, I had to think about other ways of how can I scale the design system to cover more use cases. And then I started to kind of think that, okay, well, maybe I'll just bring in what I've learned from content modeling, that, you can, to a certain degree, generalize things, that you just focus on the deliverables components that can be used in multiple contexts, that they are generic enough. And then, of course, if you generalize too much, because of course you can deliver your design system as design tokens and just like, well, hey, teams, just create whatever you need from these tokens. But then, of course, you then lose some of the cohesiveness. And again, it's not the great user experience. So yeah, I guess it's this finding the balance between generic and super scalable, and then still maintaining the user friendliness in using both the design system or the content model. So those are the similarities.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And so it's always about that balance of abstractness versus concrete. To the more abstract it is, the more powerful it can be in terms of composable experiences of all kinds, but you still got to keep it usable. You reminded me of one of my favorite things I've ever seen. I think an artist I believe his name is Christoph Newman, created this thing called the abstractometer, which is has this really abstract thing at one side, hyper realistic thing on the other, and this sort of slider in the middle. It sounds like that's where you are. You're operating that slider, trying to find the appropriate place. Hey, one thing, what about the differences between, because I have my thoughts about this, but I'm really curious about yours about how do content systems and design systems differ? It seems like they have kind of different intents. Like, to my mind, content is operating towards like a, either advancing in a journey, whether it's providing information or motivation to do a task or something like that.
Yeah.
Whereas design systems are more about helping a designer do things consistently. Anyhow, I want to hear your perception of that,
Yeah.
like how they differ.
Yeah, I think the biggest difference is unfortunately that there is a lot of interest towards design systems. So when I was a product owner or digital product lead for a design system, it was like people came to me and they knew about the design system. They wanted to know more. It was very easy to approach the stakeholders. The stakeholders came to me. But when it comes to the content systems, people are not actually that interested in. So yeah, so there is something around the design as a topic that people find very appealing, and then the content management somehow doesn't have the same vibe. People are maybe find it a little bit too either boring. Also, people have a lot of bad experiences from CMSs, so I think that probably might be one reason. But yeah, I think that is it's super like harder sell. Content systems are harder sell from the product owner or product lead perspective than design systems.
Yeah,
That's what that is definitely the biggest thing, and I think that it's people are still like very geared towards concrete things like building pages, and so people, I think many people have very very kind of a strict, I don't know if strict is the right word here, but very like firm opinions what content management is. So they're not necessarily super open to hear about what is it today. People have very firm opinions and perceptions, maybe from, few years back when it was still different.
Yeah, you're reminding me of like the way, like everybody's kind of aware that they can't draw that well and that they appreciate designers because they're good at like, doing visual and experiential things better than, but everybody feels like they can write and everybody has access to like WYSIWYG kinds of tools. But that kind of gets at like one of the main benefits of the work that you do is that you're able to articulate in content models, like, kind of sort out that content by its purpose and its use and its structure, and articulate that in a way that makes it scalable, which is your whole thing. Like this whole notion, the whole reason you're so pragmatic and holistic about this is so that you can scale things and operationalize them. How does so it's always I mean, we just hear this all the time as content people that the designers get all the love and we're the poor stepchildren. But have you found any ways to make content management more sexy, I guess?
Well, I quite recently I came up with this sort of a slogan that good content management enables creativity in scale. I haven't been able to test that message still with a broad enough audience, but what I mean with that is that because what typically happens is that you start let's say that you are creating a new website. That's a very simple example. There's a lot of focus on how things look like and, what is the design and layout and yada, yada, yada. And then the content model, all the CMS is kind of configured to match exactly what the designer sort of designed. And that's sort of at that point, if you are not actually looking into the content model and kind of think a few steps ahead, you are kind of cementing the layout and the visuals quite badly, because then you go and create your content, you use the CMS, and suddenly you have like, I don't know, 500 content items and 500 pages. You have a big website. And then someone thinks that, oh, we need to redo the visuals. We want to do a facelift. We want to do a visual renewal. And then you kind of start looking into what you need to do. And then you realize that, oh, it means that we need to buy a new CMS in the worst case, or that we need to kind of rework all 500 pages somehow again, because they don't support the new idea of the, the visual layout. So that's typically often stops the whole thing. At least it hinders it a lot. So a quick visual update actually becomes like a much bigger project. So what I've been trying to then explain that actually, if you do start from the content model and you break down your content into more structured content, and you actually start applying some semantics in a form of taxonomies in minimum, and you kind of keep that away, you really separate the content from the presentation. So then you no longer need to do this big content work in order to renew how your product, how your design, how your website looks like. You can kind of separate them totally. And this is what I mean with the creativity in scale, is that you can do a lot of visual revamps and all sort of improvements in quite a short period of time if you actually in the beginning already imagine those situations, because that's kind of maybe the holisticness and being pragmatic and thinking the operations upfront, is that, yeah, I mean, it's not a project. It's not a project where you create a website and you have a nice design on your website. It is a product that you very likely want to develop. So you need to think about the development steps, even if they are, in 2 years' time. But setting up the initial implementation in a way that you can do development in the most efficient way, because I mean, it's costly to develop digital systems, digital products. So why not think about it in when you actually start the initiative and think that how can we ensure that we have the budget to actually develop this in the future as well, and that our budget is not actually going to operations and these silly things that don't really add value but just only keep the product alive. How can we ensure that we can develop the product with small budget if our budget is being cut? So all these scenarios you kind of have to think about in the beginning, because if you start think about it when you actually come into the situation that, hey, now we need to do something, then it's too late.
Mm-hmm. And you've done this enough that you can help people anticipate that coming. I mean, this is what I think a lot of us in the structured content world think of as like, we're future-proofing not just your content, but your operations as well. You also, what you just described, the whole scenario just now, reminded me of this kind of fundamental notion in modular architectures of separation of concerns. That like designers design, content people content, and do you, because you're working in like IKEA is an interesting place to be consulting, because I know they're fairly, it's an old company, well established, but I know their digital practices are evolving really quickly. How do you still have to sell that notion of separating those out, like teasing out the content from its presentation?
Yeah, a bit. People are very consumed about how things look like, and I'm not opposed to that per se. But what I'm sort of trying to say in every occasion that I can is that you can still create amazing looking presentation. You can still deliver pages if you like, but you should actually think your content operation in a different way, because if you optimize your CMS to deliver pages, then you are ruling out the other use cases like omni-channel content, reusing content, and this creativity and scale thinking. So yeah, I think there is still a lot of that messaging to be done. It's also, I also struggle a lot to find the right words to educate people who don't have the technical background, because it's very easy to talk about these things when you have an audience who has been working in digital and they understand, the back end and front end and all these kind of basic concepts. Then it's much easier to explain that, hey, this is how a headless CMS works, and this is how you separate the content model from the presentation, and hey, this is how you actually enable the creativity in scale. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm open for any advices how to communicate this to people who don't have the, some sort of a technical digital background.
This is why I was just gonna say, this is why I do the podcast, so we can all share this kind of stuff with each other. Because what you were just saying is like, I talk constantly with people about this, that one of the things, just that the two things you mentioned about communicating with a non-technical audience about the benefits of these kinds of systems, but also just that cemented in page level thinking that people have and how to get them out of that. It sounds like you're, I mean, do you have any, just specifically at that level of communicating with stakeholders, like going, like, oh, well, yeah, you could think of this as a page, but actually, if you look at the elements on there, they could be used in other ways as well. Do you have a little, I don't know, presentation or, stakeholder wrangling tips around that?
I quite often actually pull out a recipe website that I worked with, I think 2018, so quite a long time ago already. And I have because food recipes are quite familiar. Everyone kind of, even though they don't cook that much, everyone kind of understand that they have a certain structure. And I've been explaining this via the food recipe example, because you can have a food recipe like, anyone can set up a simple blog where they share food recipes. But basically then what you have is that you have a heading, you have a field for the heading, for the recipe title, and then you have like one big body field where you write the content. You have the the ingredients and the preparation steps, etc. So that's like, it's very simple. You can do it with a very page-driven way if you like. But then the recipe site where I created the content model for that recipe site. So there we actually broke things to very fine grain. And what we also did was that we were connecting the ingredient lines, if you like. So the that how much you needed and what unit and what was the ingredient. So we actually connected that line to the preparation step, which meant that we were able to create this experience, which is very good if you browse the recipe with your mobile, that when you scroll down and you actually go to that preparation step, it repeats the ingredients. So you don't have to scroll back and check that, okay, well, how much was I supposed to add the seasoning and what seasoning, because maybe the step says that add seasoning or add flowers, and then you're like, okay, how much? And then you need to scroll up. But when you repeat the ingredients that are actually mentioned in that preparation step, you don't have to scroll back and forth anymore. And that was really that typically kind of helps that people understand that that yeah, if you do this a little bit upfront work, that you break down things into smaller, like in a finer grain content model, you have more opportunities to present it. And so this has been kind of my way. It's kind of bad that the recipe site is in Finnish. I mean, if it would be English, for example, it would be easier to explain. But I think example is a very good good way to explain this, and have some very familiar concept like food recipe to do it as your example, because everyone kind of understands what are the kind of the ingredients of a food recipe, if you like.
That's funny. I almost always default to events because I do a lot of event stuff when I'm trying
event
to
is another thing. Yeah.
But I think I'm going to switch to recipes because my mind is going off like, oh yeah, and you can have nutritional information and sourcing and all that, Hey, Tuija, I can't believe it. We're already coming up close to time. These conversations always go way too fast. But before we wrap up, is there anything you want to revisit from the conversation or just make sure that we share before we close?
Yeah, so I think what I would really like to emphasize is that when you start an initiative or project or whatever you want to call it, which has something to do with content management, the operations and really thinking ahead that what sort of operational processes, operational tasks you at the moment have for your content, because I'm pretty sure that majority of those tasks are something that you can actually make much more streamlined if you actually think about your content in a little bit different way. If you move away from this page thinking, if you move away from everything needs to be created manually together, if you really want to future-proof your content, and when you do future-proof your content, you are at the same time release a lot of people from manual tasks that I don't think that anyone enjoys. So, I mean, at this point, I often actually say that, there is a lot of talk about the 4-day week. So, I mean, you can achieve 4-day week if you actually look into these silly manual things that people do, for example, with content. There are probably other areas as well. How about if you optimize and automate those, and maybe your team can actually work 4 days instead of 5 days?
I love that. That's the best articulation of that benefit. So those are the two. So I'm taking home two big things. Recipes is the best example of this, and the big benefit is like buying back some of our time. Fantastic summary of the benefits. Hey, one very last thing to you. If folks want to follow you or connect online, what's the best way to connect?
LinkedIn, definitely. So just drop me a message if you want to talk.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. Really great conversation.
Thank you. It was fun.
Thank you for listening. If you can think of a friend who might enjoy this episode, please share it with them. And please join us again for our next content strategy interview.